Watch this image. Not the ceremony around it, not the uniforms, the flags, the protocol that surrounds every single public royal moment. Watch them. Watch the way William positions himself relative to his aunt. Watch where his eyes go when the formal proceedings pause and the two of them are left for just a moment in something approaching private conversation. Watch Anne. Not the Anne that the public sees, the formidable, unsmiling, duty-first Princess Royal who has been carrying out royal engagements since before most of her critics were born. Not Anne who famously told a would-be kidnapper in 1974 that she simply was not going to get out of the car. Watch Anne who is, according to multiple sources close to the senior royal household, operating in 2024 and 2025 as something the British monarchy has almost never had in its modern form. A trusted advisor to the heir. Not a courtier, not a private secretary, not a communications director. A family member. A senior royal with 60 years of institutional knowledge, zero appetite for personal drama, complete indifference to public opinion about herself personally, and an absolute, unconditional commitment to the survival and credibility of the crown. And she has chosen, quietly, deliberately, without a single public statement or briefing, to put that knowledge and that commitment in service of one person's future reign, William's. Tonight we examine the most underreported alliance in the modern British monarchy, and we explain why the woman that everyone overlooks is in fact the most important person in the room. But before we go any further, if you are the kind of person who wants the unfiltered truth behind the royal PR machine, the kind of analysis that the Palace Press Office would very much prefer you never encountered, then hit that like button now, subscribe to this channel, and turn on your notifications. Because what we are building here, topic by topic, is the most forensically detailed portrait of the modern British monarchy that exists anywhere on YouTube. And you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now, let us get into it. To understand why Anne's alliance with William matters so much, why it is strategically significant rather than merely familiarly warm, you need to understand what Anne represents inside the institution. Because the public image of Princess Anne, however impressive, dramatically undersells the reality. Princess Anne is, by almost any objective measure, the most institutionally credible working royal of her entire generation. Her engagement record is extraordinary. For years, she has carried out more official engagements annually than any other member of the royal family, including the monarch. She does not cancel. She does not complain publicly. She does not brief against colleagues or position herself for public sympathy in the pages of tabloids and glossy magazines. She works, relentlessly, visibly, without apparent expectation of recognition or reward. And critically, she has done all of this whilst maintaining a studied distance from the internal dramas that have consumed the public narrative around the royal family for the past decade and beyond. Anne did not publicly comment on Harry and Meghan's departure. She did not take sides in the Sussex crisis. She did not become a character in anyone else's story of royal dysfunction or familial collapse. She simply continued working, travelling, representing the crown, while the institution around her fractured and reformed and fractured again. And then again. This combination of extraordinary institutional credibility, total personal discretion, 5 decades of accumulated knowledge about how the monarchy actually operates at every level makes Anne uniquely valuable in the current landscape. And William has known this for considerably longer than most people realise. The relationship between William and his aunt has always been warmer and more substantive than the public narrative would have you believe. Anne was a consistent, supportive, non-judgmental presence throughout William's childhood, a period, following Diana's death, when the stability of family relationships carried enormous psychological weight for a grieving young boy who was simultaneously being prepared for the heaviest institutional burden this country can place upon a single human being. She did not offer William the emotional expressiveness that Diana represented. That was never Anne's mode. That was never how she operated. What she offered was something different, and arguably far more durable. Reliability. Institutional knowledge. the unspoken message communicated not through words, but through decades of consistent action, that the crown, for all its extraordinary costs, was worth serving. William absorbed that message, and in 2024, as he begins to run the operational monarchy with increasing authority and increasing visibility, he is turning to the person who has been living that message for 60 years and asking her to help him build the next chapter. The William-Anne alliance became visible to those watching carefully, to those who understand the semiotics of royal positioning across a series of moments throughout 2024. The D-Day 80th anniversary commemorations in June of that year were perhaps the clearest signal. Charles attended, but in a visibly limited capacity. His illness and his ongoing treatment meant that the primary representational weight of the monarchy fell, as it had increasingly fallen, onto William's shoulders. And Anne, whose military connections, whose personal history with veterans' causes, and whose sheer physical presence at ceremonies of this kind carries a weight that no newer royal can replicate or manufacture, was positioned alongside William in a way that communicated something very specific to the people who understand royal protocol at the operational level. Not beside Charles, beside William. The visual hierarchy of a royal engagement, who stands where, who processes in which order, whose proximity to the central figure signals institutional alignment, is not accidental. It is managed, deliberate, and communicative in ways that the public rarely decodes and the press rarely bothers to explain. Anne beside William at the D-Day commemorations was a message, a clear one. It said, "This is the team. This is what the monarchy looks like going forward. Duty, service, experience. The future king alongside the princess who has spent 60 years demonstrating what those words actually mean in practice, not a sentiment, but as a daily discipline." Sources close to Kensington Palace describe the operational relationship between William's office and Anne's household, managed with the same ferocious efficiency that characterises everything the Princess Royal does, as having deepened significantly since Charles's diagnosis became public. Specifically, Anne has become a resource for William on questions of institutional memory. On the question of how things were done, how relationships with foreign governments were built and maintained, how military connections were managed across decades, how the ceremonial machinery of the monarchy functions at a level that no briefing document, no matter how comprehensive, can fully capture. This is knowledge that would normally pass from sovereign to heir over decades of patient, structured preparation. The unusual circumstances of Charles's illness and the accelerated timeline of William's operational involvement that followed have compressed that preparation dramatically. Anne is filling the gap, not publicly, not with fanfare, not in a way that positions her as a power broker or creates the impression of a regency by stealth or some sort of shadow governance that the tabloids could seize upon and weaponize. But in the meetings, the phone calls, the quiet conversations that happen in the margins of official engagements, and in the private spaces that the cameras never reach, Anne is giving William something that no courtier and no briefing document can provide. Lived experience of what this institution truly is, at its core, underneath the pageantry and the protocol, and what it takes to hold it together when everything around it is pulling it apart. Now, here is the dimension of the William-Anne alliance that makes it genuinely powerful and genuinely consequential for every other member of the royal family. Because this is where it gets interesting. Anne's greatest institutional asset is not her work ethic. It is not even her accumulated knowledge, extraordinary as both of those things are. It is what she has not done. She has not given interviews about family divisions. She has not positioned herself sympathetically against any member of the royal family in a way that would create a factional identity or invite the press to construct a narrative around her. She has not briefed journalists. She has not allowed her household to become a source for palace intrigue stories, for the kind of background briefings that show up in royal biographies and newspaper profiles as anonymous quotes from sources close to this person or that person. In an institution where the walls have ears and the carpeted corridors have leaked constantly for decades, Anne has remained completely watertight for 6 decades. 6 decades. That is not an accident. That is a choice, made repeatedly, under pressure, over an extraordinary span of time. And this makes her, in William's strategic calculation, uniquely trustworthy in a landscape where trust inside the royal family has been catastrophically eroded. Because William, who has watched his family fracture in the most public and damaging way imaginable, who has seen the Sussex crisis play out in real time, who has read the memoir and the Netflix series and the Oprah interview and all of the subsequent commentary, is building a court around himself with one overriding principle. No leaks, no factions, no repeating the Sussex pattern. No allowing the internal architecture of the monarchy to be turned into ammunition in a public war. Anne is the living proof that this is achievable, that a senior royal can operate at the highest institutional level, carry enormous public responsibility, navigate decades of internal family drama, including some of the most serious scandals the House of Windsor has ever faced, and never once become a weapon in someone else's narrative war. Never once give an interviewer something to quote. Never once let the mask slip in a way that could be used against the institution she has spent her life serving. That is the model William is building toward, and Anne is simultaneously its exemplar and its most powerful validator. Now consider what this alliance means for the others. Because no alliance inside an institution like the British monarchy exists in isolation. Every relationship has implications. Every proximity has a cost. For Camilla, and this is the part that the palace press operation will absolutely not want you thinking about, Anne's growing proximity to William and the deepening of her influence within the operational monarchy further isolates Camilla's household from the genuine centre of power. Anne and Camilla have never been publicly adversarial. There have been no open hostilities, no leaked briefings, no moments of visible friction that have made it onto the front pages. But their institutional relationship is cool, the polite, managed distance of two very different women who share a family but do not share a philosophy, who have arrived at the same institution via entirely different roads, and have fundamentally different ideas about what the crown is for and how it should conduct itself. As William's reign takes shape, and it is taking shape right now in real time, while Charles remains on the throne, Anne's influence grows. Camilla correspondingly shrinks. The inverse relationship between the two is not accidental. It reflects a deeper truth about where William's vision of the monarchy is pointing. For Andrew, and this requires no subtlety, because Anne has no subtlety on this subject, the picture is equally clear. Anne has zero tolerance for what Andrew represents institutionally. Sources describe her view of the Andrew situation, the Epstein connection, the catastrophic Newsnight interview, the Royal Lodge standoff, the ongoing, grinding reputational damage that his continued association with the royal family inflicts on the institution as entirely uncomplicated. He is a liability. He needs to go. His presence in the public eye, his refusal to retreat quietly and completely, his insistence on maintaining a footprint that keeps drawing media attention back to the worst story the House of Windsor has faced in living memory, all of it represents, in Anne's institutional calculus, an unacceptable cost. William knows Anne's position. It reinforces and validates his own, and together, the heir and the institution's most credible senior working royal they represent, a united front on the Andrew question that makes the outcome, in the long run, close to inevitable. For Harry, and here we must be careful, because the emotional dimensions of this are genuinely complex, the picture is more nuanced, but no less consequential. Anne's relationship with Harry, prior to his departure from royal life, was warm in the practical, undemonstrative way that characterizes all of Anne's family relationships. She did not hover. She did not offer constant emotional availability. But she was there. She was reliable. She was consistent. She was the kind of presence that a family like the Windsors, structured around duty rather than emotional expressiveness, considers a form of love. But she has not been an advocate for his return. She has not been a back channel for reconciliation efforts. She has not positioned herself as a bridge between the Sussexes and the institution they left. Sources suggest that Anne's view of Harry's legal campaign, The lawsuits against the British press, the memoir that aired the family's most private wounds in public, the testimony and the interviews, and the documentary series is one of deep institutional disapproval, regardless of whatever personal sympathy she may privately feel for the difficulties and the genuine pain that led him to those choices. Anne is aligned with the institution over the individual. She always has been. She has made that alignment the defining choice of her entire public life. And William, who is making the same alignment the central, non-negotiable principle of his future reign, has found in his aunt the most powerful possible validation of that choice. Because when Anne, who has given 60 years to the institution, who has sacrificed privacy and spontaneity and a certain kind of ordinary human freedom in service of the crown, when Anne says the institution must come first, it carries a weight that no politician and no courtier and no communication strategist can manufacture. The alliance is not loud. It does not generate press releases or staged photo opportunities, or the kind of carefully orchestrated moments of warmth that modern royal communications teams produce for public consumption. It does not generate leaked briefings or background interviews, or the slow drip of flattering profile pieces. It generates something far more durable than any of those things. It generates a monarchy that knows what it is, and is committed with 2 generations of shared conviction and shared discipline to surviving. Here is the long arc of what the William-Anne alliance actually represents. And this is the part that I find genuinely extraordinary when you step back and look at it from a distance. It represents a deliberate, conscious choice by the future King of England to build his reign not on the model of his father, the intellectual, the environmentalist, the man who waited 70 years and arrived with a vision, a complex and genuinely interesting vision, but a vision nonetheless, but on the model of his aunt. The model that says, do the work, keep your counsel, serve the institution rather than using it as a platform for your own concerns, however legitimate those concerns may be. Let your engagement record speak, where your words would only create controversy. Do not explain, do not justify, do not seek to be understood by a public that will never fully understand the constraints within which you operate. Just continue. Just endure. Just remain. It is not a glamorous model. It does not generate the kind of cultural fascination that Diana generated, that extraordinary, complicated, incandescent public presence that changed how the world thought about the monarchy. It does not generate the kind of controversy and conversation that Harry and Meghan generated, for better and for worse. It does not even generate the complexity and the intellectual interest that Charles's long heir apparency generated over its remarkable span. But it is, in the long view of institutional survival and the survival of this particular institution, is one of the most improbable achievements in the history of modern governance, the most effective model the British monarchy has ever produced. The late Queen operated on precisely this model. She did not explain herself. She did not confide in journalists. She did not brief against her family members, even the ones who made that extraordinary restraint almost unimaginably difficult to maintain. She did not seek sympathy. She did not seek to be understood, or vindicated, or celebrated for her sacrifices. She worked. She endured. She outlasted every crisis, every constitutional challenge, every cultural shift that should, by any reasonable historical analysis, have ended the monarchy's relevance entirely. She lasted 70 years on the throne. 70 years. And Anne, who is, temperamentally, more her mother's daughter than any of Elizabeth II's other children, who inherited not just the late Queen's work ethic, but her fundamental orientation toward the institution as something larger and more important than any individual within it, has operated on the same model for 60 of those years. Without faltering, without wavering, without the public ever catching her, not once, in a moment of visible doubt about whether the whole extraordinary enterprise was worth the cost. William is watching. William is learning. And William is choosing with the clarity of a man who has seen the alternative up close, who has watched what happens when the institution's interests and an individual's needs come into conflict, who has experienced the collateral damage of that conflict in the most intimate possible way. He is choosing to build his reign on the foundation that his grandmother and his aunt have spent their lives demonstrating. Duty over self, institution over individual, the long game over the immediate vindication, the discipline of silence over the relief of speaking. And George, now approaching the age at which his father was beginning to understand, in the way that only proximity to real power can teach, what the crown truly asks of those who hold it, George is watching too. He is watching William. He is watching Anne. He is absorbing, in the way that children absorb things long before they can articulate them, the model that the institution's two most disciplined living practitioners are building in front of him. The model that has been built in front of every future monarch by the generation that preceded them. The model that says, this is what it costs. And this is why it is worth it. And the monarchy that George will eventually inherit, if the William-Anne blueprint holds, if it survives the pressures that are already building around it, if the next decade does not produce some crisis that cannot be managed by discipline and discretion alone, will be leaner, harder, more focused, and more institutionally resilient than anything the House of Windsor has produced in generations. Not because it is perfect, not because it has resolved its injustices, confronted its hypocrisies, or made a full accounting for its history and its secrets, but because it has, at its operational core, two people who have decided with absolute conviction and at genuine personal cost that none of that matters as much as making the thing survive. Two people who have looked at the institution, seen it clearly, seen its costs and its contradictions and its extraordinary capacity for self-destruction, decided, we are going to hold this together anyway. Because something would be lost if it were not held together, something irreplaceable, and something, for all its flaws, genuinely worth preserving. And here is the question that I find myself returning to every time I examine this alliance in depth. Is the model that William and Anne are building duty, discretion, institution over individual, silence over accountability? Is that the monarchy that Britain deserves in the 21st century? Or is it a monarchy that has learned to survive by refusing to be accountable for anything it does not choose to explain? Is the discipline that makes Anne so formidable and so effective that studied impenetrable discretion a form of integrity? Or is it a form of control? And when William builds his reign on that foundation, is he building something that will serve the country? Or something that will simply endure? Because endurance, in institutions as in individuals, can sometimes be mistaken for virtue, when it is actually just stubbornness wearing better clothes. I do not have a clean answer to that question. I am not sure anyone does. But the William-Anne alliance makes it the defining question of the monarchy's next chapter, and it is a question that every person who cares about this institution, whether they want it preserved, reformed, or abolished entirely, needs to be asking. Because the answer will shape not just the next reign, but the question of whether there is a reign after that. The quiet alliance between the future king and his aunt is not just a story about two people. It is a story about what kind of institution the British monarchy chooses to be in the century ahead. And right now, it is a choice being made in private meetings and quiet phone calls and the margins of official engagements, without a single briefing, without a single statement, without the public being invited in. That is either the most reassuring thing about the British monarchy or the most troubling, possibly both simultaneously. That question has no easy answer, and I want yours. Tell me in the comments below what you think. Does the William-Anne model represent the monarchy at its best, or the monarchy at its most closed? Is discipline the same as integrity, or is silence sometimes just another word for unaccountability? I read every comment. I engage with the arguments, and this channel is built on the principle that these questions deserve serious, forensic, unfiltered analysis. Not the kind of coverage that the palace press office approves and the royal rota packages into something safe and digestible. If that is what you are here for, and clearly you are because you made it to the end of this, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the bell, turn on notifications, because topics 15 and 16 are coming. And they deal with two stories that the palace and the Sussex communications team are both, simultaneously and for entirely different reasons, absolutely desperate to keep well away from you. Do not go anywhere.